All right, we are at time, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Chinachun, and I'm with NACB and the Consultants Training Institute. Before we proceed with the Around the Valuation World today, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to obtain CPA credit, you must answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webcast. If you have a CPE subscription for through ABW, you'll receive the CPE service within 7 to 10 business days after today's webcast. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. It's also be directed to the presenters. If you have a technical question or question about NACBA, feel free to use the chat feature. It's also be directed to me. With Around the Valuation World and Around the Valuation World International, we try to cover all the hot topics in the industry. However, within 2 hours, we don't have enough time to cover all of the items. In your material that you can download, there are links to other resources that are available to you. So if you have a moment you want to stay abreast to all the upcoming topics, feel free to use that link, the links there to access the information. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Mel and Alina, who will get us started with the webcast today.
Thank you, Chinda. It's so good to be here, and welcome to the webcast today. We've got another great program lined up, which is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start off with one of my favorites, and he is a regular on the program, and that is with Michael Gregory, touching on industry headlines, giving you a bunch of resources and the things that are going on that are hot topics we need to think about. Then we'll move into the BVFLS Body of Knowledge Brief with James Ewart and Dorrell, and do some industry expert insights in the healthcare evaluation with Ed Mofrad interviewing Jessica Bailey-Wheaton and Todd Zigrang. And then Alina and I will have the honor of speaking to the honorable judges in the judges panel, which is going to be fun. We're going to talk about some things about objectivity, advocacy, and bias in the courtroom. And then Nainesh Shah will talk about standards and ethics. And then Michael Gregory will close us off at the end with industry and expert insights and ethics and valuation. So with that, we'll get to our first segment, which is with Michael Gregory. Michael Gregory is a BV mediator, a negotiation specialist. He has written multiple texts, multiple books. He's got tremendous number of years of experience in the valuation field, navigating, negotiating, and settling these types of disputes, and is a wealth of knowledge. Mike, it's so great to have you on board again. I'll let you take it away.
Mel. Thank you, Mel. It's always a joy for me to be here, too. We've got 6 different articles I'm going to bring to your attention today. The first is Valuation Lessons from Connolly versus the U.S., and that's an article written by Greg Caruso. And I encourage everyone, if you're involved with this issue at all, read that article. I'll go over some key points. Rethinking the site visit in the post-COVID-19 era. Common errors addressed in the final AICPA Business Combination Guide. Comments wanted on proposal of IRS regs regarding appraiser disqualification. That's been on last month. I'm bringing that up again this month. Most BV firms see higher revenue in 2024 and even more so in 2025. Good time to be in the BV area. And new artificial intelligence for BV newsletter debuts today. That was on January 8th, but I'm bringing it to you in today's session if that's something you want to check out. So our objectives for today, we want to recognize valuation lessons from the Connolly Supreme Court case. Reconsider your site visit. Those are things that are very important, and we're just saying it was important before COVID. During COVID, they kind of went away. After COVID, are we really doing this, and are we doing a good job at it? And apply lessons learned from common errors from mergers and acquisitions. Take action on the IRS Circular 230, where it's being proposed that appraisers will come under Circular 230, and that anyone could say, I think this appraiser did wrong, and you would be investigated. Assess profitability for BV firms in 2025, and then consider the new newsletter from Ron Burkhart on artificial intelligence and business valuation. So starting off with this particular case, this is the Connolly case, and if you're not familiar with that case, you likely should be, because you may be asked questions relative to this issue associated with your valuations, and had to do whether or not fair market value of insurance is added to the value of the firm. And under the fact pattern that was there were two different cases that came before the appellate court, that came before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made a 9-0 decision and said, yes, the way this was structured, this insurance that came from a partner passing away and the insurance money coming to that entity is income. It's a matter of equity relative to that entity. And as such, it increased the value of the firm by that amount. Well, that was not exactly what was the intention on the part of the parties. And Greg Carisso, he's been the editor here for this program historically. He's a valuer in New Jersey and Maryland area. And he wrote a book, and he also then came back and wrote a specific article relative to this case. And it's very helpful from my perspective what he wrote, because we're not going to be the experts with the attorneys, but the attorneys may look for some advice. And I'm in here thinking, Greg presented several options of, based on how this was written as an attorney, this is why the court made the decision it did. But the court didn't say it always is going to be part of income. It's always going to be part of the value or equity, part of the firm. Instead, he said there are other options. You could have cross-purchase agreements. You could have trust-owned insurance. You could have defined purchase prices. So those three applications going forward, he goes over the pros and cons of those. There might be something you'd want to be able to give to your attorney that you're working with an estate, for example. And I just presented a couple of weeks ago in Portland, Oregon, to the Estate Planning Council there in Portland. They had 450 people in attendance. I was a 75-minute presentation on IRS issues and valuation. But the last session of the day was on this case and an attorney speaking on this case for an hour to other attorneys. So this is a hot topic amongst the attorneys. And then lessons learned for planning ahead is basically the key. If you plan it out properly, you can still have the benefits, but you need to plan out and make appropriate decisions. Rethinking the site visit. You know, like I said, before COVID-19, we had a good handle on what those were. They disappeared during COVID. And now here are basic things that came out of this article that make a lot of sense to me. You get to see the physical layout, the equipment, the working conditions. What does inventory look like? How clean is the place? Are there a lot of people standing around? Are people working hard? Do they have very few people? You can't tell those things on a virtual visit, but you can get some real insights on an in-person visit. So you want to have that real-time visit. You can talk with people there today with what are they working on, what are they doing, what are their problems, what are their concerns, and he really can help you have a much better report. Of course, you can follow up with virtual visits once you've had the in-person visit, but it's very important that you take the time to have that in-person visit. And that's the key that came up in this particular article. Common errors addressed in the final AICPA business combination guide. So let's just take a look at mergers and acquisitions. And it talks about what you need to know as a business valuer from the standpoint of how the AICPA says you need to do these things and avoid these common errors in practice. And they lay those out. And they talk about addressing not only the weighted average cost of capital, but the weighted average return on assets and IRR. And I have to admit, I'm aware of WACC and IRR. I hadn't thought about weighted average return on assets, but it makes a lot of sense once I read through that too, especially for financial reporting. And how could you address debt versus equity? And what is debt and what is equity? And it runs through some specific elements for consideration. And sometimes there's a question whether something is that debt or is that equity. And then how to address inventory. And this is the guide. They don't offer training on it. It's no training by the AICPA, but you may see other folks offering training on this. It could even come from NACPA. We'll see. Most BV firms see higher revenue in 2024 and even more in 2025. So this is an analysis of folks who responded to a survey. 62% of firms expect revenue to be higher in 2024 than 2023. And the reality was they saw more than that in 2024. Mostly due to increased volume, but for about 40% it was due to increased fees. 23% of firms expected lower in 2024 than in 2023, and that's just not what happened. And for 2025, it's similar, with 63% are now planning on increased fees in 2025. And then there was a thought that with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the end of this year, what's going to happen with the exemption going forward? And it was thought it was going to come down to a lower number and possibly a higher tax rate. But with Donald Trump being the president, it's thought that something like that, what we currently have, is going to continue, and you probably won't have the rush on valuations that we may have had under the previous administration. New AI BV newsletter debuts today. This is from Rod Burkhart. Rod Burkhart is a person who's very well known in our field. He's got a newsletter. He helps out folks who are getting started in this business and people who want to improve their business. But he's come out with a new AI for BV newsletter. It's going to come out twice a month on Wednesdays, plus an in-depth video tutorial. He's going to have featured prompts and other resources and tools. And he's saying for anybody who wants to try his new AI BV newsletter, it's free for a 30-day trial. It converts to a subscription of $18 a month, or it's $180 for a year with 2 months free. And you can cancel at any time. So it's really a very low risk. You might want to check it out. There are, of course, questions relative to AI and what we should be doing. In fact, I'm going to expand on some AI additional intelligence with our session next month with some articles that have come out specifically on how to check AI in reports and some other things. So AI is with us. It's an ongoing topic. And here's a new newsletter for you to check out if you're interested. In terms of resources, here's the accounting and valuation guide from business combinations from the AICPA. You can download that. Here's comments on regulations governing appraisers before the IRS. I brought that up last month. You can respond on this through February 24th. You might want to see what it says. I know the major appraisal organizations like the ASA and the AICPA and NACFA are preparing responses on this. You may want to submit your own response. There are very strong concerns that anybody could say, from their perspective, what you did was wrong before the IRS turned you in for Circular 230. You'd be identified publicly as having an investigation on you. It may take a long time, could take months or even years before they finalize that. Meantime, that would be on your record. So you might want to think if you want to give any comments with respect to that, you have time to do it between now and February 24th. Here is the additional resource for AI for business valuers from Rod Burkhart. If you want to obtain that for yourself and try it out, you're certainly welcome to do that. And then these are the sources that we use with the initial 10-minute session here with Around the Valuation World. And this month we use BV Wire, BV Update, and Quick Read. With that, thank you for listening to me. And I'm on the end of today's session talking about ethics and valuation. And I'll see you at the end. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it on back. And Mel or Alina, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Mike. You're awesome as always. And for everyone else, now you have your polling questions. So make sure you respond to that. And now let's get into something really interesting, especially given today's economy and financial climate. We are taking a forensic look at the audited financial statement of the United States. So with everything happening in the economy, from rising debt levels and all these fiscal policies, understanding these numbers is more important than ever. So we have James Ewart, who is going to break down what's really behind the numbers and what they mean for us as valuation professionals in his discussion with Dorrell. So James, take it away.
Thank you, Alina, and good morning or afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Darrell, and he's really no stranger to NACFA, but he's president of a boutique forensic accounting firm in Lake Oswego, Oregon.
Uh-oh.
We cannot hear you, James.
Yeah, lost you, Jim. Audio.
Yes. No, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, Lina, I think we lost him.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we cannot hear you. So if you can start just talking about your presentation, or he's gonna join you in a little bit.
Okay, let me know when you want me to begin.
Yeah, you can start
Good,
now.
Jim. You can
Yeah,
proceed and
go
just let me know
ahead.
when you want to advance the slides.
Okay, good. And Jim, thanks for the intro there. Jim and I have talked about this a few times, and he's had some really interesting comments about it. I hope I can carry those forward. On the screen, you'll see what's called the GAO, that's the General Accounting Office, audited USA financials for the 10 years ended 2023. Now, in next week, the fiscal 2024 will be released. We don't have those yet, but you'll see these highlights. I'm doing a 1 hour session after this 2 hour window, drilling down more deeply. So next slide. And here are some of the people involved in it over the past several months. I got started in it about 2020, so 4 or 5 years ago, and spent a couple of years solo building it and got other people involved. Next slide. Now, this is dedicated to the citizens. That's you and I, that's everyone, because it's such a significant impact on our financial condition, and particularly those US citizens with specialized financial knowledge. And that's you and I on this session. And the reason for that is we have to take this message to the decision makers, the Senate, the House, the voters, anyone who will understand, because we are in extremely bad financial condition. Now, I used methods that you'll see in a moment to determine that status. I was frankly shocked when I discovered it 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, but it has to be corrected. Next slide. And when we analyze this, and this is every year the answers come up, that the United States of America, your country and my country, substantiated by its own audit, and it has an audit every year, is insolvent. And think about that, insolvent. And so we analyzed 10 years, and that's about 2,500 some odd pages of the audited financials of the United States. And we applied generally accepted tests, such as the balance sheet test, the cash flow test, and the adequate capital test. And every year, insolvency was the result. Now, you'll see some highlights in the middle here. The U.S.'s insolvent condition is corroborated by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. And those are the audited results. And you'll see some highlights. In last year's, 2 years ago session, they had 385 criticisms of the U.S.'s financial statement. That's not all of them. Those are the highlights, though. And notice terms like material weaknesses were listed 84 times, budget deficit 66 times, opinion disclaimers 54 times. And bear in mind, these are the auditors for the government auditing the government's own financial statement. Now, most of you who have at least a nominal accounting background will understand that even one material weakness in a financial statement can be considered serious, if not fatal. And so we identified additional steps that must be taken by us, by the citizens and our decision makers, to increase our to better our financial condition and move us away from our disastrous underwater circumstances. And so you'll see that after this, we assess the gravity, we analyze the composition of taxation and spending patterns, and so on and so forth. Now, I've got highlights for you. Next session. Next slides, please. Now, for comparison, the median net worth of U.S. households is about $166,000, $167,000. And this is just from a few months ago. You'll see the liabilities only about 60,000. And what it does indicate is a substantial disparity in wealth distribution, which is no surprise to anyone. And I see a question coming in. And the question was, do the USA financials reflect land? Yes, they're reflected at fair market value, acquisition value. Now, the corollary to that question is, what about something like Yellowstone or perhaps national parks and so on and so forth. Would the fair market value be greater? Possibly, but bear in mind, even if those were redated and updated to current fair market value, we don't have the cash to address them unless we somehow monetize those intangible assets and tangible assets. Next slide. So what you need to do after you hear this and see these numbers and these indicators, contact your senators, contact your representatives, your legislators, so on and so forth. And I'm putting it in your laps because there's no one better in this entire country, this great country of ours, than everyone on this session. You understand the numbers, you can contact these decision makers and start to make a difference. Next slide. Now here's a summary of the financials. Next slide. Now recall that we use the last 10 years and each financial report has about 250 to 275 pages. And something I had to constantly remind myself of in going through this is that these numbers are in trillions of dollars. I've worked in billions before a few times, as most of you have, but trillions of dollars. And I will tell you the circumstances, the United States has about 225 trillion in gross domestic product, plus or minus. And you'll see in comparison to our circumstances how we rate. Next slide. Now here's a summary of the about 270 some odd pages. I've identified the page numbers, and right here is a statement of the Comptroller General in red, 10 pages, and most importantly, down at the bottom in red is the GAO's independent auditors report. And this is where most of the criticisms come from. So these are not my criticisms. What I'm doing is reporting the government's own criticisms on their own financial statements. Next slide. Now, when I said they're insolvent, the question becomes, what is insolvency? And here's a reference back to the REIT source. And I've testified to insolvency a few times on very, very large companies, very small companies, but it gives you some indication how significant the circumstances are. Next slide. Also, our team established a SWOT analysis, and there are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the classical sense. And one of the strengths, about the only strength we could identify, is financial reporting. The government does an amazing job of reporting, almost overdoes it to some extent. So that's a strength. The weaknesses is that there's a disconnect financially or fiscally. It's balance sheet driven. There's not much at all on the income statement and almost nothing on the cash flow. And by the way, the cash flow, the accounting methods used by the federal government are cash, modified cash, and accrual. And so that by itself adds some additional challenges. Now you can read through these others. Cash flow is abysmal. Spending is out of control. Taxes are ridiculous. But there are opportunities to that, and that's where you and I come in. We want to educate our clients, our populace. We want to help get the country out of this circumstance. Next slide. And go back one, please. Yeah, go back once. There, no, forward. There we go. Okay, good. These are some comparative circumstances showing change in gross domestic product and then the change reflected for the respective year. And I've got some highlights here. Notice from the GAO with regard to the debt, as discussed in this report, an unsustainable long-term fiscal path. And that's what the executive summary in these financial statements says about our financial condition. Page 7 has the current fiscal path is unsustainable. And these are by the GAO sources, Government Accountability Office. And then finally, the debt to GDP ratio was 97% and is expected to reach 531% until 2028. Now,
Darrell, can you hear me now?
yes, go ahead. Thanks,
Good.
Jim.
So, sorry to interrupt you. We've got only about 3 or 4 more minutes. And one question I did want to ask, and we covered this when we talked a little bit beforehand last week. Do you think, as far as the election's concerned, don't you feel the public, maybe is getting this a little bit now, or is beginning to understand some of the seriousness of this and the gravity of it? And do you think that the president's being responsive to it with what's going on with Musk and what he's undertaking? Or do you think that's just like a drop in the bucket?
Well, it's a great point, Jim. I think it's a little of both. Frankly, someone's getting the attention of the administration, the new administration. Some actions are being taken, which I hardly endorse. And you've probably seen some of the things from USAID recently, some of the just
Mhm.
unconscionable money spending. And that's indicative of many of the aspects of the federal government. So I think, to answer your question, it's a start. I just hope it's sustained because we are in serious financial condition.
Yeah, and I think just to follow up, it seems like there has been a pretty strong mandate given the result of the election and the actions. And now we may not agree with what the actions are necessarily on the how it's happening, but maybe the need for it to happen is certainly um, seems to be appropriate, because if the spending is out of control and we have no real controls over the spending that's going on. I mean, you hear stories of people that haven't shown up for work for 10 years and still are getting paid and what. Now, I don't know if that's the exception or whether, I would like to think it is, but nonetheless, that the fact that we got any of it is of concern. And I think there's a general feeling that there has been just this. It's more political than it is fiscal, and I'm curious as to whether or not you sense, at least, whether or not fiscal is starting to come back into the equation, and then I think we're going to have to end with that.
Okay. When you said political versus fiscal, I know where you're going with that, but the point being, it's been political for the last 10 years at least.
Right.
And that's put us in the fiscal disaster that we're in.
Yes. Okay, good answer. We'll turn it back to you, Shonda, and I encourage everyone to stay afterwards because Darrell's going to be doing a longer program for an hour to go through this. It's really good stuff. It's interesting stuff. It's eye-awakening. Every time I get on this subject with him, I have trouble when I get home getting it out of my head. But then, like many of us, time heals lots of things, right? And it goes away and other things fill it up. So, and it doesn't become the priority. But I really appreciate, Darrell, what you have undertaken here. And I know it's not been easy on you because I know that you've been subject to personal attacks. And people are feeling that you're making these numbers up, that they're not real. So kudos to you for your leadership here, and thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for taking on the session that follows AVW today.
Thank you,
I'll go
James
back
and
to you.
Darrell. This is I think it's hugely important as a citizen and as a professional to do this. I actually did an episode on my podcast about this called The Great Melt Up, because this is a train that's coming down the tracks, and if we don't figure it out and we can't get the right people doing the right things, we're gonna have there's no turning back. So
Good comment, Mel.
thank you. All right, we'd have another poll question up as we move into the next segment. I think, Chinda, do you have a an announcement that we need to do, or we're going to move into the next segment, just so I
Uh,
know.
just really quick, there is a link to register for Darrell's session that follows after this. It starts at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So go in. I can go ahead and I'll pull the link and add it into the chat as well if anybody's interested in joining that. But I also wanted to mention another upcoming free webinar that we have. It's the State of the Valuation Profession with Chris Mercer. That's going to be on February 24th from 2 to 3 Eastern time, and you get 1 hour CPE. And it's just to dive into the state of the valuation profession as well. So, and with that, I will
And
turn it back over to you, Mel.
thank you, Jinda. And Chris's presentation on that is always really helpful. So, all right, so we're going to move to our next segment, and this is the industry and expert insights. Ed Mofrad is going to be introducing the guests. We're going to be talking about healthcare valuation, industry updates, what to expect in 2025, what is happening. Ed is the president and founder of Mofrad Financial Solutions, a firm that's based here in California and does accounting, tax, and valuations, and is frequently a correspondent on these AVWs. Ed, so good to have you here, my friend, and part of this today.
Mel, I could not have thought of a nicer introduction. This is my grand entrance. You should have been a showman. Thank you. And I, in turn, have the pleasure of introducing my guests today. My guests are no strangers. I've worked with them before. In fact, I feel honored, comfortable, happy to be working with such great people from HCC Health Capital Consultants, all the way from St. Louis, Missouri. We have Mr. Todd Zigrang, who is the president of that great organization. He focuses on the areas of valuation and financial analysis for for hospitals. It's still too early in the morning for me here in California. Physician practices and so forth. And then also his senior vice president, Miss Jessica Bailey-Wheaton, who is actually an established attorney who's also doing this. It truly is my pleasure to be interviewing you great people. Todd, let's start with you. How are you doing today this morning?
Ed, doing great. How are you doing?
Okay, it really is a pleasure. Last time I was interviewing you live in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, yeah.
I've gone to so many interviews this year that I sometimes get confused which city was which. Okay, I know your firm works solely in the healthcare valuation space. Talk to me a little bit in general, about that. It seems like such a niche area. What made you get into it? How did you excel in it? Your years of practice, is signature to your success. Nobody needs to really talk about it. We all know it, but give us a general background.
Yeah, it's, I guess, still a little odd to hear healthcare industry as a niche industry, considering it's 20% of our GDP, but definitely is more of a specialized area for appraisal and valuation. Some of the things that we see in healthcare that might differentiate it from some of the other industries that our colleagues are appraising is the payer system. It has a complex structures involving third-party payers. The individuals and the companies that are paying for your care aren't necessarily the individuals who are receiving the care. So that's different than we see in a lot of other industries. Highly regulated. As you mentioned, Jessica is an attorney. I'll have her address some of those, but that certainly drives a lot of the M&A activity that we see, drives the futures of how these organizations operate, plays an impact on their value, as you can imagine. Healthcare, we're talking a wide range and broad spectrum of specialties and places of service. How some entities have higher fixed costs, variable costs than some of the other industries. And unlike other industries, there's these kind of more altruistic aspects, such as providing access to care, innovation, quality, all those things that we might not see in other industries. And even how service is changing for even the same ailment, how it's being cared for, who cares for it, where, and sometimes even when the treatment happens is changing. Certainly, there's favorable long-term trends when we talk about healthcare. Certainly, people are getting older, or the population as an age is getting older, where more and more care is needed. The players in healthcare are very different, whether it be the insurance companies, the providers, the patients themselves, policymakers play a big part, vendors. In the last decade, we've seen a whole lot of non-traditional healthcare entities getting involved, such as the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Apple, Microsoft, private equity, venture capital, all these players in the same sandbox, not necessarily working together, and sometimes at against each other, makes it very challenging at times to perform the work that we do in assessing value of our companies that we're looking at in this complex environment in which they operate.
Well articulated, well articulated. And Jessica always has such a neat way of closing out what you're saying. So, Jessica, would you like to come in at this point and tell us your view on it?
Sure. Todd laughing at me. I think he thinks I'm going to tell him he was wrong the entire time.
Yeah,
While that tends to seep into my job description, I try not to do that as a matter of practice. But no, I think Todd hit it right on the head. You know, we wouldn't have a job, we wouldn't have this firm if it wasn't for the healthcare fraud and abuse laws that are out there. You know, say what you will about them, and we have plenty of comments, but that is the reason that we do what we do. So how those laws change, how the courts enforce those laws, how the government enforce those laws. It's vitally important for us to stay on top of that because it does change how we approach our healthcare engagements. So I think it's really why we do this presentation for the most part every year for the NACBA, because it is an industry where you have to stay on top of it because it changes with the weather.
And the very fact that you shifted your professional career to this field is testimonial to how important this, how significant this area is. Could you tell us why you did that? Why you decided to shift to the healthcare and valuation area?
Sure. I think at the end of the day, even though we don't practice law at Health Capital, I am working in healthcare law every day. And that was always what I wanted to do from the start of my law school career. So I really enjoy that it is getting to work in that space. We get to directly help hospitals, physicians, new entrants to the space. So it is, in a way, Todd talked about that altruistic part of healthcare. And for us, I think we kind of get to see that, and we get to help that along through helping them close out these transactions that they're looking to enter into, and helping them justify why it makes sense for their organization, their patients, and their community. So all those things really drew me to healthcare valuation and to HCC specifically.
And again, I had the pleasure of interviewing both of you in Vegas in December. That was 2 months ago, but sometimes a day makes a huge difference. Can you update us from 2 months ago? Has anything changed from the interview that we had 2 months ago in Vegas?
Oh gosh, well, there's a lot of talk. How much has actually changed, substantively changed, I think, is perhaps up for debate at this point. We're maybe 40 days into the new year, 2 weeks into a new presidential administration. So there's a lot of headlines. How much clarity we have as of yet, I think is perhaps not as much as we would have hoped. So I think one of the first things we predicted in our presentation, and Todd, feel free to jump in, is we talked a lot about the Medicare physician payment schedule. So the way physicians are reimbursed by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services drives a lot of the work that we do, especially in our healthcare compensation arrangements where we're valuing healthcare services. That payment reimbursement to physicians has been decreasing when adjusted for inflation, somewhere around like 33% since 2001. So that is an issue that is vitally important to healthcare workers, to physicians. And it's so tied up in regulations that it literally takes an act of Congress to change how they are paid. So that is something that's been really in the forefront of Congress, presidential administration, CMS, and other executive agencies. So we kind of predicted that the MPFS, it's called, the Medicare Physician Payment System, or fee schedule would be overhauled perhaps in 2025, and get physicians that payment increase they need. To date, there is a new bill out there to increase physician payment rates by, I think it's 6.6% for the remainder of 2025. So that's to compensate for the payment cut they're currently getting and then to make up for it through the remainder of 2025. So we are seeing Congress starting to prioritize that. But we haven't seen any bills come forth this calendar year to overhaul the methodology so that they can stop having to step in and do these payment increases every year. Because I think this is the fourth or fifth year running now that Congress has had to step in.
I must ask, this bill, is it a Trump era bill, or is it a remnant from the Biden era? And does it have the chance to be, over Trumped, no pun intended, by Trump?
Sure. So a little bit of both, actually. So there were a number of bills in Congress last year at the end of the year to increase that payment to physicians. It was cut out of the December continuing resolution at the last minute. In fact, at the request of now President Trump, I think in part because his administration wanted to secure that victory themselves. So it has had bipartisan support over the years. This current bill has bipartisan support, so I do think it has a very good chance of passing. The overhaul itself, how that methodology will change, there's a number of different suggestions out there. So how that ultimately ends up may become a bit partisan, but I think there is bipartisan support to change it. So the concept has bipartisan support. How the nuts and bolts of that concept kind of work out remains to be seen.
And I think this is a great example of how different healthcare is from other industries. Just this one topic, and how this one topic can impact the value of an organization is kind of sometimes boggling to the mind. So absolutely, this is a great question. And Jessica, thank you for bringing that up and to help illustrate my point and clarify the things that I previously said.
Good. I was going to get to you, Todd, but you superseded me. Wonderful. Jessica, you mentioned about the 4 pillars of healthcare back last time you and I talked. You want to talk about that and let the people who were not in our last interview to give them a brief background about it?
Absolutely. So anyone who's attended one of Todd and I's presentations with the NACVA has heard us talk about the 4 pillars of healthcare. It is a conceptual construct that was developed by the founder of Health Capital Consultants, Bob Samasi. And those 4 pillars are reimbursement, regulatory, competition, and technology. And we look at those as kind of the 4 big market influences of the healthcare industry. So they kind of shape how providers and enterprises act in the transactional arena. It helps us kind of focus what we need to look at when we are valuing healthcare enterprises, assets, or services. So if we look at, a given specialty, a given healthcare provider, if we look at, what the reimbursement environment is for them, the regulatory environment, what their competition looks like, and then what technology is, helping them or perhaps serving as competition itself, those kind of things help us devise our constructive framework through which we're looking at the subject interest.
Todd, how do you feel what Jessica just pointed out in an outline format pretty much is going to affect valuation and the process of valuation, in your opinion?
Well, certainly I'm lockstep with her on this. This provides us a roadmap in which to do our work. If we can answer all the questions that arise from our review of an organization when appraising it through those different silos of question types that we call pillars, I think we're 90% there, because as much of a science valuation is, and we all have the books lined up in our offices and telling us how to do things, there is so much art in it, and that's what differentiates, I think, the specialization of healthcare valuation from some of the other industries, is being able to understand how to to interpret the numbers that we see. We know how to put the numbers into the formulas and to get the result of it, again, from the science, the formulas and so forth. But the inputs that go into it is just as important, if not more important, than the actual math, if you will. And to have that, the four pillars, that construct available to us as a reminder to ask the right questions throughout an assignment, get those answers, whether as certain as those answers might be, or even as uncertain as they might be. We're talking healthcare and how things are moving. Just talked a bit about the election, how that will impact to some extent. We just don't know yet. And however, we're asked to appraise an organization based upon the expectation of future benefit. Well, we're asked to be futurists in a way. And how healthcare is going to change under the new administration certainly plays an impact on how we appraise these organizations. For instance, the Affordable Care Act, certainly that was the bedrock of how healthcare is being delivered for the past decade plus. During President Trump's first administration, that certainly was on the cutting block. This time around, what's going to happen with that? Probably not be repealed, but however, I'm sure there's going to be things in which is going to enhance. That's going to be, I think, President Trump's rally he's going to save the Affordable Care Act as opposed to repeal it. Supply and demand for services, certainly when we talk about supply, we talk about providers and provider shortages out there. That's going to play a huge impact on the work that we do. The merger and acquisition activity is all a function of all the things that we've talked to prior, and supply chain problems, not just the equipment again, but with staff and who is performing those services within a healthcare organization is changing from entity to entity, sometimes even ailment or episode of care to episode of care. How these providers are being compensated, that's playing a large part in this, and who is employing them. We're seeing that shift from independent practice of medicine to an employed or a corporate structure in which providers are being overseen, how their care, having some say in how their care is being provided within the different mechanisms of the reimbursement, the regulatory, the competition within the area. I know we're talking about the covenants not to compete, taking back those restrictions on employment that we've seen in the past. How is that going to impact, especially when we're talking physicians and the majority of physicians being in an employed position? So all these create the certainty and probably even more uncertainty that really takes into account the art and staying up to date what's going on to be able to try to uncloud the fogginess of the crystal ball we look at as being futurists when appraising these organizations.
I realize you may have already answered parts of the next question I'm going to ask, but I'm going to ask it. We live in very transitory, fluid times in the sense that last time I talked to you, it was a different year, a whole different president was in office. Obviously, President Trump has taken over since January 20th, and he's at a speed that is unimaginable. He's changing so much in America. So that contrasted with pillars, because the word pillar denotes or connotes stability and steadiness and being fixated, because pillar is strength and, being fixed. So how do you contrast these two? I mean, the four pillars, everything you talked about. I mean, we wake up every morning to new laws and new changes. How do you contrast it? How do you stay certain about anything in this transitory time?
Well, I think the only thing certain is uncertainty, and that's no different than the prior administration to even the administration today. That's just one impact that has some influence over how care is being delivered. Certainly, there's others being the markets, being we talked about supply and demand issues of providers, technology. Definitely health tech is playing a greater and greater role. Artificial intelligence, another thing. All these disrupting influences in not only how care is being regulated, how it's being paid for, how it's being provided, all of which, again, to bring it back to that the construct of the four pillars, all of those fit within those four pillars one way or another. And again, if you're able to identify, not just answer the questions, be able to ask the right questions. That's really, I think, what the specialization in healthcare valuation brings to, at least to me, to be able to ask the right questions to assess where the organization hopefully is going that we can assess.
How about you, Jessica? Any predictions for the Trump years coming up? What's your take?
Yeah, I think one prediction actually that I didn't have in December that I have now, and maybe I had it in a sense in December, we talked about it a little bit, but it's got a bit of a twist on it now, is the enforcement of healthcare regulations. So we talked in December during our presentation about how, typically when Republican presidential administrations come in, they tend to deregulate. Obviously in healthcare, that can help spur transactions in the space among providers, and decreases their risk. Now, I think not only may we have that deregulation, but I think the enforcement of those regulations are going to become more difficult for a number of reasons. There's a couple of court cases, or one court case in particular out there that may keep private citizens from being able to bring lawsuits on behalf of the U.S. government. If you all have heard of the False Claims Act, it's a law that's been in place since the Civil War. And it's not just in healthcare, it spans other industries, but it's used a lot in healthcare in connection with fraud and abuse laws. And private citizens will bring those cases on behalf of the US government, and essentially helps the government not expend their resources, but still capture that fraud and prosecute it. There's a case right now that would render those provisions unconstitutional, meaning the private citizens wouldn't be able to help the government out. Now we're also seeing all these headlines regarding the Department of Government Efficiency and their reduction of the government workforce. There is talks that there is an executive order coming out this week that would reduce the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically their staff. So I think the reduction in the government resources may really reduce how much enforcement we're seeing of these fraud and abuse laws. So I think that in and of itself could be something I didn't contemplate back in December quite to that extent, but could have a huge impact on, transactional activity in the healthcare space, and just everyone's perception of the risk of, the services they're providing.
And that's interesting that you say that, Jess, but considering that enforcement, the return on dollar for healthcare enforcement is 3 or 4 times. And so in a way, it doesn't make too much sense to cut back on that enforcement whenever they're really realizing such returns.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
We're just about out of time. Just your closing comments, any final thoughts, remarks? First, let's go to Jessica and then Todd. Jessica.
Well, I think I'll steal the quote Todd always likes to say. The one U.S. president that came out of the state of Missouri is Harry S. Truman. His famous quote is, the only thing in this world you don't know is history, right? The history you don't know. And I know I butchered the heck out of that quote, Todd, so you can correct me. But I think we've been through tumultuous times before in the healthcare industry. We've, seen things up in the air. So I don't think it's completely new and different to the industry. I think they'll have pivots, but exactly how that all plays out is something that certainly I'll be keeping an eye on. And for anyone who likes to keep up with that stuff, Health Capital puts out a topics e-journal every month. You can subscribe on our website, and we always are keeping up with these topics and writing about them. So I'm happy to share that knowledge and those updates as we write them, if you subscribe.
That's good to know, Jessica. I appreciate you letting us know that. So people can just contact you directly or email you for that, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And Todd?
Yeah, I'll take Jess's offer a step further and just please email us if you have a gnarly situation that needs another set of eyes or half a brain to think on for a bit. I'm pleased to kick things over, try to listen to your situation. Certainly, I know I lean on others as well. So I think that's what our organization provides all its members is like a sense of community that we all, at the end of the day, put out a better product.
Everything else aside, I truly enjoy talking to you guys. I mean, I get on so well with you guys. So I hope to have the pleasure, the honor to, interview you guys more, maybe live again in one of the upcoming, get together. So, Alina, are you ready for us? You're just about done.
Yeah,
we are.
Okay.
Yeah. We are.
I hope we didn't go over our time. Thanks again, Jessica and Todd, and until next time.
Always fun.
Thanks.
Before we go to the next one, I'm just going to play this quick little video and then pass it over to Mel and Alina.
Windy Street is a prominent outsourcing firm in India that offers a comprehensive suite of services, including valuation, financial due diligence, accounting, auditing, and tax. Founded 3 years ago, with a clear vision to provide exceptional services to professional and accounting firms, we now proudly serve over 15 clients. Our success is built on our unwavering commitment to the values of trust, quality, and people. Our team of over 150 skilled professionals is led by a highly experienced leadership team. We bring unmatched expertise and dedication to every client relationship. At Windy Street, we believe in putting people at the heart of everything we do, our clients, our team, and our community. We also prioritize complete security and a robust IT infrastructure, ensuring that our clients' privacy and data are safeguarded at all times. With Windy Street, you're not just a client, you're a partner in a journey toward excellence.
Thank you, Chinda. And we have our third polling question up. Make sure that you're answering all the polling questions if you want to get continuing ed credit. And this is a segment. Alina and I have not done this segment together before. This is kind of cool. We get a chance to have a conversation with the honorable judges and everything. And so we have some questions. I'm just going to see which judges we have with us this morning.
We have Platts and we have Judge Driscoll. Oh, and Jade's too. So the three are here.
Oh, we have all three judges.
Yes.
Hi, judges. So let's see if we can bring them up and we can have the conversations with them. This is Alina.
I'm with you all, but
what is your name?
I don't know if my camera's working.
Oh, no, your camera is not working.
All right, I'm gonna go to hair and makeup,
but we can certainly hear you, Judge Driscoll.
Okay.
He said he's putting his makeup on. He's similar to when I'm starting the show and people are just waiting for me. I'm like, oh, my camera is off. I need to put my makeup on.
Historically, that hasn't made a difference.
It's so so we have Judge Yates, Judge Platt, and Judge Driscoll. Some on camera, some not. That's fine. This is going to be fun because we wanted to have a conversation with you all around the idea of objectivity, advocacy, and bias in the courtroom as a witness and that type of stuff, because many of us could get ourselves in trouble if we're perceived to be an advocate, perceived to be biased in some way, and lose that credibility at trial. And so I'm going to start off and then let Alina take it from there too. But just the first question I just want to, in general, is really, how do you even identify potential bias in an expert witness testimony, particularly those of us that are in financial matters?
So I'll be the faceless person just answering at the start, and I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues. So one of the starting points is, what's your experience, and are you only working for one side, or have you only been working for one attorney? So diversity of experience is good, not just for you professionally, but I think very much for you as an expert in terms of your believability. If you're always aligned with one point of view or one part of the discipline or one lawyer, that's not gonna cut it as much as having a diversity of experience. And Melanie, I wouldn't necessarily say that that is confined to financial experts. There's nothing as special as you all are, or as we say in Long Island, yous guys are, as special as you all are. It's the same analysis for all experts. It's the same thought process that we go through, which is, have you done this work only with one part of the discipline, which is, again, perhaps could be more tempting for financial experts to do, but it's something that every expert has to guard against that tendency.
In terms of the way you appear on the stand, one of the tips to me is that if you seem way too eager to answer the questions from your retaining counsel on direct, and then really adversarial when you get all the questions on cross, that looks like you're nothing more than an advocate. My best advice is to listen to the questions, answer the questions that are asked, and try to maintain a pretty consistent demeanor from start to finish, no matter who's asking the questions.
And if I could amplify on that, ignoring the other opinion. Now, that's a certain amount. That's why you need to talk to your retaining counsel, make sure you get asked the right questions. But if you ignore the opponent, if there is an alternative expert, and then you can't ignore what he or she is saying. And if you do, then depending on who your audience is, and that's something that I think, as I've repeatedly and on almost everything we talk about it, keep in mind who you're trying to persuade. If you're trying to persuade a judge, that's one thing. If you're trying to persuade a jury, that's another. If you're on jury, you need to know who it is that's on the jury and what, if any, biases they have. But ignoring the other side's opinion or dismissing it in an arrogant way makes you less likable. Less likable equals most of the time less credible.
Yep.
And if you're less credible, then the reason you're less credible is because you are perceived to be in some way either biased or stupid. And you don't want either.
I can see the Judge Driscoll now, so that is great. But there are some red flags that you can tell when you are, and you have all these professionals in front of you, and this particular one is just making a statement that, as Judge Platt just said, it may sound not credible at all, but you can tell that it's just trying to convince you of something that not necessarily is true just because I'm biased to one side?
Yeah, one of the things that I would say is that it's perfectly fine to be the smartest person in the room, but you don't want to come off like you think you're the smartest person in the room. And that's a fine line to walk, but a little humility goes a long way, particularly if your answers are really powerful.
And a little bit of a human side too. The risk of boring you with a war story. When I was doing the Arizona ICE valuation, one of the expert witnesses said, "Well, I have a Six Sigma black belt in XYZ." And I said, "You got a black belt? Should I be standing should I move my chair in case you get a little angry?" And he said, "Your Honor, that's a business certification." Like, I know it is. I'm just trying to, trying to humanize this months long trial. So I think still recognizing what is a trial all about. You've all heard me say it. It's telling stories around the campfire. Still be interesting and interested.
And amplifying on that, the red flag can be not only a red flag, but a multicolored flag. Not answering the questions that you are asked and answering questions that you aren't asked. If you start answering questions that you are not asked, particularly if they don't bear on the subject matter that you're an expert in. The one I always remember, and as Judge Yates said, you don't have to be a financial expert to fall into this. I still remember reading a doctor's report on a very serious slip and fall case where the person became a paraplegic as a result of the fall. And the doctor, who was the defense doctor, was amplifying why these injuries weren't caused by the slip and fall, and he all of a sudden says, in in about the third or fourth paragraph. And also, I looked at the sidewalk, and it doesn't look like the kind of sidewalk you'd slip on. And the from then on, I paid absolutely no attention to what he said because he had just revealed where he was coming from and how much he was being paid for it. The other thing is, let me mention, I'm sure you're aware, and we certainly are aware, that some states, and I'm not sure whether Michigan or New York falls in, Maryland does, they have statutes and or rules that require that the expert not make more than a certain percentage of their income from testifying. And so you have that usually a pre-trial or pre-arbitration or pre-whatever motions practice on that subject. So you may not get to testify if the perception, it's more of a finding than a perception, is that you're making too much money doing what you're doing and offering opinions usually for one side or the other. And so that's really important to be able to do those calculations and know and combat them for both you and retaining counsel when it's brought up, and it's going to be brought up.
I'd add one more.
I'm sorry. Is that a percentage? Is that a percentage or a dollar amount usually?
Could be either. Well, no, it's almost always a percentage in my experience. In Maryland, it's a percentage.
Okay.
We don't have a percentage requirement in Michigan except in medical malpractice cases. But one of the things that I would say, though, is you don't have to hide the fact that you're getting paid a fair bit by the hour for your testimony, particularly in big money cases. Everyone expects that. And especially when you're trying a case to a bench instead of the jury. I'm never offended if an expert's being paid $500 or $750 an hour. I actually view that as something positive. Maybe juries
same
react
here.
differently.
I always say that we judges are often the lowest paid, well-educated person in the courtroom. That's
exactly
what happens.
Couldn't agree more. It's one of the reasons I became an arbitrator. And it's always, to answer the question further, it's almost 100% of the time a percentage, and in many cases the states has it only in malpractice cases. But again, you don't know, and even if it's not by statute or rule, if it looks like it could be made an issue, it will be. And I value the same way that my colleagues do. If you're good and you get paid well, that's not a negative factor.
Not at all.
Great. So, us as experts, sometimes we're passionate about our findings, the work that we do. But I think there's a fine line between a passionate expert that's advocating for an analysis and someone stepping into advocating for the client itself versus the work that was actually done, and how to allow that, like you said, Judge Driscoll, you said about humanizing it, allowing that passion and that professionalism come out, but at the same time not cross the line. How to balance that, or what are the elements that we need to think about in that regard?
Can you still be interesting but be disinterested? In other words, interesting as you tell the story, interesting as you relate potentially complicated valuation concepts, just as an example, and put them in layperson's terms. And yet at the same time, on cross-examination where your mettle will be tested, to not get sucked in and being defensive. And yeah, there's a weak point in your analysis, or if there's something you must concede, of course, concede it. And if you concede it without getting angry or upset. My favorite Super Bowl halftime show of the last 10 years was Lady Gaga. Poker face. All right, a little more of a poker face than getting angry and bristling and letting your body language look like that of an advocate, because you're not an advocate.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, and I guess that when I started doing litigation, one of the things that I found is that people as you mentioned, Judge, they get mad. And my experience is that even with other experts, when you tell, oh, it's a mistake, I'm not perfect. So how we can work around it, it's better even for our client at that point. Because if not, usually what they do is they use that mistake that you don't want to accept to then say that the rest of your report is really bad. So I guess it's a problem for you too.
Yeah,
and
I would
so
say
I'll
this.
give you another cultural reference. You know, Pearl Jam, the song "Just Breathe." Just breathe when you're being challenged. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't get sucked into the battle that is litigation. It's so important because it makes you seem less objective if you get sucked in. I'm sorry, Chris, I interrupted. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And from the perspective of jurors, it's always better to appear human than to appear perfect. There's nothing wrong with conceding something here and there, particularly if you do it in a very human way.
That does not work for marital advice, by the way. I found that the more I try to be human around my wife, the more trouble I get in. But...
Better to be perfect, right?
You're never going to win.
I'm never going to
win. No. You know, it's interesting. You know, we've mentioned juries a couple times. I remember being interviewed for a case that I got on, and it ended up not going to trial. But the attorneys that interviewed me literally. So I have gel in my hair. If you can't tell, when I had hair, you could tell more. But this attorney said, if we hire, he asked me, do you own a brown suit? And I said, no, but why? He says, if we hire you, can you own a brown suit? And I said, yes, but why? And he said, well, because brown has been seen to exude trust, grounded earthiness in front of juries, and I want you in a brown suit, and I want you to get that stuff out of your hair. And I go, how much is this case? I'll buy a brown suit, you know. But they were looking at it saying the audience is a jury versus a judge, and we want to make sure that we're doing the things that don't turn them off as the case goes on. And I think that it was the first time it was the only time that I had someone say that to me. And since we didn't go to trial, I didn't buy a brown suit. But how much do we play to the audience without making it look like we play to the audience?
Yeah, there's a world of difference between testifying before a jury and testifying before a business court judge. With a business court judge, I think you're going to stand or fall based upon how effectively you can explain your thesis and defend it. With a jury, who knows? I always thought, because I tried lots and lots of criminal cases, both as a lawyer and as a judge, and I always think the juries basically get it right in criminal cases. My experience in business cases, I only had 5 jury trials. Everybody wanted a bench trial, but 5 jury trials in my 10 years doing business court cases. And I think the jury got it dead wrong 3 out of the 5 times.
Wow.
Again, and I would expand that to note. You certainly ought to know who the judge is if that's who you're trying to case, and where he or she is coming from, and where they have been, and if to the extent that you can hire Dr. Bull or somebody like him to look at the jury, it can't hurt. Find out what you can. The background of jurors when they're picked, and then ultimately selected, and including who the foreperson is not there's not a lot of information unless you dig into it or pay somebody to do it, but it's well worth doing. And again, if you're doing an arbitration, I didn't just finish, it was about a year ago, 3 arbitrators hearing a case in which 8 plaintiffs suing their stockbroker for giving them bad advice, and 3 experts, an economist, another stockbroker, and all testify, and a CPA, all testifying. At the end of it, three arbitrators looked at each other. I was the chair, and I said, does anybody think that any theory expressed by any expert in any way makes a case or even comes close? Answer no. I said, thank you. I'll write it up. Yep. So again, they weren't credible. And the reason they weren't credible is is that they didn't know who it is they were talking to, and they didn't shape their testimony. Again, retaining counsel needs to ask the right questions.
If I could throw in one more aside before we move on to the next question, I have to be careful what I say about juries because I'm actually appearing as part of a jury pool on March 5th and 12th, and I'm dying to get selected.
Well, maybe you should wear a brown suit, Judge.
I know. I know I've got earth tones on now. I'm ready.
Yeah, me too. So
I think NACRA would do a service to all of its members if you accumulate some further data on the brown suit doctrine.
Yeah. But actually, in all fairness, what Mel's point, I think, is a good point that retaining counsel may want to control a lot more of you than you've ever thought about before. And if it means buying a brown suit, get the nicest brown suit you can get and trot it out. And as long as it's not something that inherently goes against your better nature, right? Whatever that thought is. I probably wouldn't look as good in a dress. I look good in a black polyester robe, but not in a dress. So just some thoughts about that.
Right. So if the hair gel is you, Mel, you got to stay with it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, but it's interesting that a lawyer can think that would make you more credible in court, especially when you are explaining financial and valuation evidence, how the way you look can make you more credible and not just the facts, right? Because in my particular case, I usually wear loud colors, and some lawyers may look at me and like, can you use black or, gray?
Huh.
And it's not my favorite, but
right.
I do so if needed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that is just the facts that are important, not how you dress, right?
Well, I think your general appearance matters. And I don't know about the brown suit doctrine, but I remember I'm old enough to remember that there was a comedian years ago whose stage name was Professor Irwin Corey.
Mm.
And he appeared on these late night TV shows, and he was like the textbook of what not to look like and what not to sound like.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a message there, and the message is you got to look like what you're there to be, which is an expert. And again, a bad lawyer asking the wrong questions or not asking the right questions can make any expert look very, very non-credible.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know there are some really highly compensated lawyers who always go to trial in well-worn suits that didn't cost a lot of money because you don't want to come across like you're wearing $20,000 suits.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing about the suits or the jackets, if you like custom clothing, which again, I'm just a poor public servant and can't afford, but if you can, if you're a gentleman and you have the jacket with custom clothing, a lot of gentlemen love the affectation of the last button on the jacket being unbuttoned.
Yep.
Don't do that. That's the rich guy. That's the rich
guy.
I
know. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah. I
think we should change the segment to haberdashery for expert witness. But it is important. It does go to how you present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
Yeah, it does.
It does. It's an interesting thing. When I started doing this, I was so caught up in the numbers and the work and the analysis and everything. And then I realized how much my ability to communicate it effectively was more powerful than the actual spreadsheet that I used to create. And us as experts need to understand that how do we communicate? How do we come across vocally with the words, with our testimony, and do that? And I think that there's probably certain qualities and behaviors you look for in an expert that make them more credible in court when presenting this kind of information and everything. And can we kind of step to that question around the qualities and behaviors you like to see that exude trust, unbiased, objectivity, and professionalism.
Confidence
You're a
without
teacher.
arrogance. How's that?
Mm-hmm. And to be a teacher, and to be a teacher is to speak in a way that folks understand, which means your cadence, your delivery, the speed with which you convey information, your ability to say things 3 different ways so that everybody gets your information. That's really what you're doing as an expert witness. But I'll also layer into that, being yourself also. So when I was a brand new trial lawyer, I was told watch as many other trial lawyers as possible, and I got some great lines, and then I realized that wasn't me. So I think you still got to be yourself. I saw this one lawyer once talk about a pie eating contest, but the way he said the word pie, it had 3 syllables, pie. And I asked him afterwards, I said, Tom, how'd you do that? And he said, well, Tim, I can. You can't. You're from New York. You speak quickly. He says, but you have a quick wit. Use what you got. Don't use what I got. So I think that's part of it too. Use the gifts that the Creator gave you.
Yeah. Lena?
So what's the one piece of advice you'd give to financial professionals who want to avoid bias in their expert testimony specifically?
The best piece of advice I can give, I'm just reiterating something I said earlier, is treat questions, no matter who asks them, about the same way. You don't want to seem incredibly helpful to your retaining counsel and incredibly obstreperous when anybody else asks you a question, particularly the court, even if you don't like the question.
And I'd amplify. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry. To quote Aretha Franklin, boy, I got a lot of musical references. RESPECT, and I just tie into what Judge Yates just said. Respect, especially respect the judge when the judge asks the question, because in a bench trial, of course, the judge is the decider. In a jury trial, the jury loves the judge because the judge decides when you go to lunch and when you go to the restroom. So to respect that, even if it doesn't seem like a smart question, just to pause and be that disinterested expert who you are.
And you've been hired to be just that, a disinterested expert. And if your retaining counsel would like you to be less disinterested and less an expert, and conform your testimony and your opinion to something that is not your opinion, that will come out if it doesn't come out before that, it'll come out on cross.
Yep.
Don't do it. And it's because the lawyer who's hiring you may walk out the door, the accountant may leave the office. In the end, you'll be better off. Your reputation is more important than any particular case or client. And you're going to get asked, if you haven't already, to do that. And it's instant disaster, either in the short term or certainly in the long term.
Yeah. I've always said it takes years to build a reputation, and it takes seconds to lose it, and you can only lose it once.
Exactly.
And once you lose it, you can't. It's hard to get back, if you can at all.
Yep. Agreed.
That goes for lawyers and judges too.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're running short on time, so I'd love to just see what parting advice each one of you have around this idea of being seen credibly in the courtroom, advocacy versus bias, objectivity, making sure that we don't step into a hole that we can't get out of.
Stay cool, stay calm. Stay cool, stay calm. And that's so much easier said than done. And quite frankly, it's also easier said than done for a judge also. So even though, we're in charge of the courtroom, it's still hard to do it. So for you to just be cool and calm, even in the face of adversity, especially with cross-examination, is helpful. Don't be afraid to occasionally sip the water before you answer the question.
I just want to say something that I can steal from Judge Driscoll from earlier. Be yourself. You're so much more effective when you're yourself instead of trying to be somebody you're not.
And being yourself means sticking with your opinions for which you were presumably hired.
Agreed.
And do not change them because somebody at obtaining counsel or the client for that he or she is working for wants you to do that, and that's the key.
Thank you, judges. This has been incredible, and I think for all of us out here, is I think that journey to objectivity and unbiased testimony actually starts at the engagement of us as an expert, and needs to carry through the engagement and not just thinking about it once we step into the witness box.
And to paraphrase or to incorporate Michael Kaplan, who's not with us today, don't get crumbs from your pastrami sandwich on your nice brown suit.
Thank you all for being here. This is so much fun, and there's just so much wisdom in having having you guys, all of you here to just pour into us as experts, so we can be better and serve our clients better, and hopefully get to better resolutions for everyone in the process. So,
thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Alina.
All
Thanks,
right.
Mel.
We really appreciate your time. Yes. We have seen the results of, the polling questions that are done during the conference, and always the judges are the favorite ones. This December with AI, everyone loves you guys. So we really appreciate your time with us.
Well, we all appreciate you immensely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So everyone, we have our polling question. Make sure you respond to that. And next, we are going to have Nainesh. He's going to be, he's part of the standard ethics. So he's going to be talking about that with us right now. How are you, Nainesh?
Hey, Alina. Always good to see you. How are you?
Great seeing you as well. I'm doing well, just laughing with the judges and learning a lot. So
I know judges, they're so great. It's always nice to hear them, and they make a difficult topic easy for us to understand.
yes, it is amazing. So take it from here.
Yeah. So I think being a member of a standard board, I wanted to give you an update on what's been going on with the standards board, and highlight a few important points, and point all of you to resources on the website where standard boards informations are there, and I'll touch on some of that. First thing I wanted to mention was, I don't know if everybody knows, but standard board's description was updated, and you can look it up on the website. But let me just kind of rehash some of the points of the responsibility of the what is the standard boards and its responsibility and what it's supposed to do. So standard boards is a standard setting body for NACVA and GACVA, and responsible for creating and promoting professional standards. Their mission is to ensure consistency, credibility, transparency, and quality. And the responsibility of a standard board is to continue education. We update comparison charts and glossaries regularly. Also, we maintain FAQs on the website. So if you have any question that you don't know clear answer of, or you can't get the answer, you're encouraged to send your question to NACVA, and then standard boards make a lot of effort on answering those questions. I'll touch on one of the questions that I thought might be relevant, or just to bring up the idea that what type of question comes up. The other responsibility standard board has is to talk to other valuation organizations, communicate with them to make sure that we are all on the same board, and then also connect with the leadership board of NACVA and about legislative matters. And the reporting, how it works is standard boards report to executive advisory board, and then all the decision kind of happens. Let me jump into a few highlights from the last few months. One of the highlight that, before I do that, let me just touch on the FAQ. So there are a bunch of frequently asked questions. There's a frequently asked question page, and there are a bunch of questions Let me highlight one question that I thought might be interesting to bring up. It's not a new question, but it just encourages everyone here present that please don't hesitate to ask. One of the question was, can spreadsheets that are not part of either a calculation report or a conclusion of a report be prepared? And then the way answers are there's an answer and then there's an explanation. So I'll just quickly touch on the answer and then you can of course go and look it up. The basic answer is if it is just a mathematical computation, then it's not really a conclusion or calculation of a value. But if it is and it falls under the other services, it's still other services are still part of the general ethical standards, so you have to follow that. But if not, then and if you're performing some kind of a valuation judgment, then it falls into calculation or a conclusion of a value or a calculation of a value. That's just an example of a FAQ that you can see on the web page. The other big work that's been going on and that needs a lot of attention is comparison charts. There are bunch of comparison charts, but two broad categories: standard comparison and the glossary comparison. And we've been working on updating both of them for domestic and international. The main idea here is you are comparing ASA standards and AICP and IVS standards and all of that, and making sure that we kind of know where what standards are relevant for that is referencing to our standard. So look out for in coming months. Look out for a new update because IVS International Valuation just came out with their updated standards, just published end of last month. We are looking into that and updating our comparison chart. On the international front, I don't know if many people are directly involved, but on the international front, we looked at a couple of months ago, we looked at this International Private Equity Venture Capital publication that talks about the standards and all that. There's also reference to Austria and Germany looking into changing how SEEP CAPM is calculated because they are thinking about right now, the way it works is the unsystematic risk is included in the benefit stream, but they are thinking of changing it. So look out for any changes there. I think the big update is almost everyone must have heard about new IRS regulation that's being proposed about USPEP and IVS standard as a reference for every valuation professionals. So let me read just a little bit of this. The IRS is proposing a new regulation that would require appraisers submitting in an administrative proceeding to conform to the substance and principles of USPAP and IVS. This has raised a lot of concern about why limiting to those two and what Standard Board is proposing is what we have done is create a task force to tackle this. The task force job is to respond to this. We might even send a representative to Washington and then see how that gets. Our biggest concern is it's limiting the standards recognized. And there is kind of a monopolistic concern that you are just recognizing two organizations, the USPAP and IVS. And the other concern is there's a penalty if you don't follow the standards. So the job we think we want to finish is ask for the small text change where it's not limited to just a couple of valuation organizations. And then we'll see how that plays out. So that's a big change that we are working on. The task force will propose, and then we'll see how we'll take it to the next step. Look out for other valuation resources on the NACWA's website that is updated by Standards Board. You can think about engagement letters, other toolkits, and all of the old resources. They were a bit stale. The binder will be updated as well. So, we look out for that. So what I really want to kind of conclude with is use the resources you have on the NACWA website. That's mostly some of that is maintained by Standards Board. Use the FAQs. There's a lot of information, and please ask your question. If you have any question, we take a lot of effort because some question might seem simple, but there might be nuances that we think about and then answer it appropriately. And we are Standard Board, as a Standard Board, we are here to support members, enhance the knowledge base, and make sure that everybody remains up to date on the information. I just want to conclude with that. We want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on with the Standard Board, and then please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, Alina. I really appreciate your time.
Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you, Nainesh. It's so good to have you here and see what's going on with the standards, because obviously they impact us greatly. So
thank you.
All right, so we're coming to our final segment, and we're bringing back. It's like Mike Gregory bookends. We're bringing him back to finish us up and talk about something that I think is huge in our industry, and that is this idea of ethics in valuation, and making sure that we operate with integrity, ethics, and objectivity, kind of like what we talked about with the judges. Without it, we don't have a profession. Without it, we don't have a career, and we don't have a future. So, Michael, welcome back, and I'm going to have you switch your slides because we got the just do a swap on the slides.
Yep. Okay, how's
You're
that?
good now. Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing me back. I'm the bookends for today, first session and the last session of the day. I talk about ethics and provide ethics to CPAs and to state bar associations. I've spoken to several thousand people on leadership, ethics, on leadership and ethics related to leadership. But with that in mind, I've gone ahead and said, about 2 years ago, I was invited to attend a session on bias by folks who are neuroscientists, and it was applied towards us as mediators, with me being a qualified mediator with the Minnesota Supreme Court. And then I said, well, what are things that we can do to overcome bias? And from that, I've identified at this point around 30 sources that I've taken a look at. It was my pleasure to address the ASA on ethics in valuation, and I put together up to a 2-hour session on this. The folks at CPA Academy have several of my courses there, and one of them is ethics that involves leadership. This session right here is going to be a very brief introduction, about 20 minutes on ethics and valuation. And I'll point out 2 particular slides that I think are especially important as we take a look at ourselves and potential bias. So in this last 20 minutes of the day here, we're going to talk about 7 ethical responsibilities, apply ethical principles to valuations, and take constructive actions to address bias in your valuations. With that in mind, here are the sources I'm using for the primary sources. The one on the left is 7 Lenses. That's written by Linda Fisher Thornton. She's an ethicist. The other 4 books are books of mine. Peaceful Resolutions deals with conflict resolution specifically. The Servant Manager involves developing new managers and managers who want to enhance their skills to be a servant manager. Business Valuations in the IRS, you're probably very familiar with. That's what is available here through NACVA and BVR and on Amazon. That's the big 850-page book that talks about 5 different components, dealing with working with the IRS, understand how the IRS works, S-corp valuations, reasonable comp, and discount for lack of marketability. And the last book on the right, it's called The Collaboration Effect. And it talks about what are ways we can collaborate with others by developing connecting relationships, listening actively, and that's the most important chapter, listening actively, and then educating others the way they want to be educated. A lot of that ties into what you heard with the judges today and how we interact with others. Now, it's only been offered for educational purposes. This is just an introduction, and I'm going to run through some things relatively quickly, but you'll have the slides. In terms of the collaboration effect, as I said, it's all about connecting relationships. It's about listening actively, and it's about educating others. And why do we do that? Because it leads to building bridges and negotiating closure. Isn't that what we want to do? And if we think about leading, what are 3 keys to leading? And we're talking about leading by example and ethically. You want to catch your employees doing something right at least once a week and thank them for something specific, something they did on a report, something they did with research, something they did with a client, something they did for some other member of your team, something they did for you. And then get them the resources they need from their perspective. And a lot of that today, particularly with folks coming in with Generation Z, is assistance with how to enhance emotional intelligence and listening and communicating versus what we can do with our phones, being technically very literate, but me not having the same skills, and they need to develop and find out how to interact with clients and things like that. And don't micromanage. Nobody likes to be micromanaged. And then give them a chance to shine through accomplishment and leadership. So give them a chance to present to other members of the group, or attend different technical sessions, or attend NACFA conferences, attend when you're meeting with a client to see how things like that work. Well, in terms of ethical behavior, most firms have a vision, a mission statement, and then they have values. And I help firms with strategic planning. And when I'm meeting with the board, I run through these, and then when I get to the values, I ask them what they are, and firms have a list of values. And then I'll come back and say, so of these values, what would your shareholders, what would your employees, what would your customers say about your values? Do you meet these all the time, most of the time, some of them? Where do you fit in terms of your ethical behavior on these different values? And for some people, it's their firm, they feel very strongly about it, and they'll say, we meet these values. And for others, they'll say, well, in all honesty, we try, but we have some that we don't do so well on. And then we'll have a conversation around that. So when you think about what are ethical behavior and ethical attributes, here are just some, and these are not all inclusive, but these are examples of different ethical attributes. And you may have some beyond this too. That's fine, but these are just some of the major elements of what you might expect to have when we're operating ethically in your business and what you do with others. And in terms of leadership, folks like to work in businesses that find themselves to be ethical. And it's a continual learning journey. I've been at this a long time, and I'm continuing to learn different elements. I'm bringing up bias and valuation in just a moment. And it's a business advantage that if you're an ethical firm, folks like to go there. I know a firm in the Midwest where a person left there and opened their own firm, and the firm he left, within 2 years, nearly everybody left the first firm and came to him because they viewed him as being an ethical leader. And then how we are responsible to others with how we interact in terms of interacting. And in terms of profitability, there are 7 major elements here. You need to make a profit, got to follow the law. Character is important. I'll talk about that. People, our communities, the planet, and the greater good. But just in general, you need to make profit, but how much profit? A major bank in Silicon Valley was getting 50% return 2 years in a row. They got their 3rd year in a row with 50% return, and people were saying, wow, how can they be doing that? Well, they couldn't. There was fraud involved, and the whole bank collapsed. So, you want to make a profit, but how much profit is enough? And how much profit relative to the balance of people in their lives and what they do outside of work and their families and what's going on in our communities? And in terms of the law, do you follow the law because that's what the law says? Do you follow the law because you understand the principle behind it? Think of the laws and regulations, and do you need to reach something beyond that? Do we have an ethical standard here that even if the law says I can do it, is it legally right? Okay, we've got that squared. But now, is it morally right? Is it ethically right? Do we feel right with what we're doing here? Stand back and look at that. In terms of character, Matt Bostrom is a PhD. He's got his PhD from Oxford University. He talks about in law enforcement, hire for character and train for competence. Hire for character and train for competence. So when you interview someone, they've met a criteria in terms of a resume or experiences, etc. But for their character, are they grounded in the same moral integrity that you have with your firm? And we're all seen by our words and what we do and actions that we take. And we are remembered by our last worst act. As much as we don't like that, we're human, we screw up, we make mistakes. Do we own up to our mistakes? Do we acknowledge what we've done? Do we also acknowledge others that, hey, they made a mistake? When somebody screws up, the first time, and I'm working with them on something, and oftentimes I will say something to lighten up the area and say, you know, up until this point, I thought you were perfect, but now I know you're human just like the rest of us. That tends to make someone who feels bad, who screwed up, feel like, okay, it's okay. They accept that I screwed up. I know I screwed up. And then we want to also give feed forward instead of feedback. Instead of saying, you screwed up, don't do that again. We want to say, from what happened here, what did we learn? And what can we, not can you, what can we do differently going forward? And you want to set that kind of example for others. And in terms of people, someone needs to trust you before they're going to want to interact with you. People want to trust you first. So if you show concerns for others, you're respectful, you care about people, you care about what's going on. I'm a USA track and field official. And I was at a track meet and an indoor meet here in the Twin Cities yesterday. And they asked us, they said, in order to keep costs down, when we're done today, can you go around and just pick up your area? Because we don't want to have to pay for people to have to pick up trash at this indoor meet. There were over 500 people at that meet. And I was there towards the end. There were probably about 100 people left. But I grabbed a bag and walked around and started picking up stuff. Just things that were left around, wrappers, bottles, whatever. And you know what happened? Other people joined me and joined into that because they said, you know, we care about this too. They recognize when you care. Just little things. I didn't ask anybody to help me. I just knew it needed to be done. We were asked in an email ahead of time. But when people know you care and see that you care, they recognize that. And in terms of your community, building strong relationships, serving others in society, other things you can do with the homeless, with the poor, with people who don't have enough food, with Habitat for Humanity. You can think of different clubs, organizations, religious organizations, but caring for our community. And then the planet. We all know about the term global warming. Not everyone agrees that it is real, but we all know there's a term out there called global warming. And what do we do to show respect for nature and in conserving our natural resources? And how about in our own business? What do? Do we just throw things away? Do we reuse things? Are we conscious of what we're doing in terms of resources? And the greater good, regardless of religion, there are a number of different religions indicated here. And I'm from Minnesota. And in Minnesota, we have two major tribes of the Dakota and Ojibwe. And I've learned from them, and I'm not indigenous, but I've learned from the indigenous community. They look at things in terms of 7 generations. And from my culture, we typically look at them about 3. You know, we got parents and grandparents, and we have children. We have grandchildren. Okay, we think about that maybe about in 3 generations. But they've taught me to think about what's going to happen 7 generations from now. When you start to think about 7 generations, you start to think more broadly and about how we interact and care about others in our world. Then I'll just ask a general question. How are ethical expectations changing? And what do you think? Are we more or less concerned about homeless, for example, and other things that are going on with the planet and with other members in our community and around the world, and starvation and other things? I don't know the answer. I'm just asking that. In terms of applying ethical principles, about half the population fits into a group called the ends justify the means. And about half the population, when your back is against the wall, you got to make that decision. You're under pressure. Say, you got to follow the rules. You're probably aware of the golden rule. And the golden rule says, treat others as you want to be treated. But there's the platinum rule, and that is treat others the way they want to be treated. And you don't know the way they want to be treated till you get to know them. That's part of the collaboration effect of developing authentic, connecting relationships with others. It's easy to vilify or be negative relative to folks you don't know. Think about that even with reds and blues in our country, how we vilify the other side. But when you get to know people, and you understand they're people just like you and I are people, and we start to say, what are their needs and concerns and how can we work together on things? And I have 4 examples, and in my 2-hour session at CPA Academy, I run through 4 different examples. I read a paragraph, and I ask people to put things in the chat, and they do. And then we talk about those. And you can read this: truth versus loyalty, individual versus community, short-term versus long-term, justice versus mercy. These are all different examples of ethical concerns. And then in terms of perspective, we all have bias relative to our perspective. All those balls are the same color. Different colors have gone across those, so we have an illusion that they're different colors. But our perspectives matter, and we all have bias. And you can read this. I'm not going to read this to you, but here's a definition of bias. And then we have explicit bias. Okay, those are things that we're aware of. And then we have unconscious and implicit bias. Those are things we don't know that we even have. I talked with one of my employees who was from Minneapolis here, and he said as a child, they had electric locks. Today we got electric locks on our cars. We take it for granted. But back in the old days when I was a young guy, you had doorknobs to lift up and down. And it was a real cool car. If they had locks that the driver could lock all the doors, that was a cool car. And he said he was a toddler driving with his parents, his mom, driving in South Minneapolis. And his mom drove on this one street, and all of a sudden she hit the door lock. And he responded to his mother. This is a white guy. He responded to his mother and said, "Mom, I didn't see any blacks." The child, as a toddler, had learned that when his mom saw black, she hit the door lock. She may or may not have been conscious she was doing that, but the toddler picked up on it and found the connection and understood that implicit bias that was there. We all have implicit bias. And then we experience bias. These are different things. Our brain is lazy. It likes stereotypes. It likes yes, no answers. These are all different things that we need to address. And in terms of implicit bias, you can take what's called the implicit bias and the implicit association test from Harvard. I've done it. Others have done it. I think it's a good test to take, and you can take a look at your own implicit bias and how strong that is. And then in terms of power by example, we want to act ethically. We want to be tough on the problem and gentle on people. And again, platinum rule, treat others as they would like to be treated. Now, a recent commentary from a judge relative to bias looking at experts. We just heard that judge's talk. Does your report indicate that it is unbiased? Did you state that? Do you have diverse representation in terms of data, or did you look at certain skewed data to help you with your approach? Were you transparent, and does somebody else understand that in lay terms? And now this is a very important slide here relative to bias. Here are 8 different kinds of bias that we have in valuation. Anchoring bias with a given number or direction that may have been given to us. Hindsight bias, knowing what happened, so our analysis might move in that direction. Engagement bias, because you feel strong with your client. Blind spots, things that you don't even notice, but others do. Availability bias, we tend to measure what's easy, and we tend to look at data that's easy to obtain. Confirmation bias, you started off with a thought that this is going to move in a given direction, and you're looking for data that affirms that. Attribution bias, looking at the character or the personality of the folks who are involved, and easy to demonize the other side. And then how experienced or inexperienced you are and bias that you have about your own ability. Well, knowing that, the good news is we can overcome bias with 3 things: intention, attention, and effort. So I've just very quickly said, if we take and apply intention and attention and effort and consider these ethical principles, these 7 major ethical principles, then you can address that for yourself and looking for ways to improve. If you want to know more about this or this kind of class, there's a class that I offer for 2 hours with CPA Academy. That's open to anybody, not just CPAs. I'd also come back and say, if you want to know more, I gave you some references here at the start of the session. You can look at those. But I'd encourage you to look at bias and valuation. And like I said, I'm up to nearly 30 sources. I think I have 27. Different articles have been written in the last 2 years about appraisers and bias. And now society is saying we think in general, oftentimes appraisers are biased. So what are you going to do to address the things? And I gave you some tips here on what you can do so that you won't be biased with what you're doing going forward. And if you have any questions of me, there's my contact information. And if you want to know more about the collaboration effect, I've got something called a pocket guide. Looks like this. I give them out with the book. I've given away over 10,000 of these in the last year. You don't need this, but I can send this to you as a PDF. And it talks about some major points of what you can do to collaborate and work better with others going forward. If you'd like one of those, you're welcome to have it. And with that, I am through with my session. I want to make sure we're done by the top of the hour, and I'm going to pass it back to Mel for closing comments with today's session. And here's the final poll question too. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you, Mike. So good to have you, and such an important topic for us today, in the past, and in the future, for sure. So, our final polling question is up. Make sure that you answer it to make sure that you get all the continuing ed credit that you want. And our next AVW is going to be March 17th, 2025. If you would like to be a guest on the webcast, do me a favor, reach out to Chinda and let us know the topic area and what you're thinking. If you have other questions, reach out to headquarters. And if you want to make sure that you register to get continuing ed, reach out to headquarters and make sure you get registered. And with that, Alina.
Thank you, everyone. And remember that we have, following this session, we have Darrell talking about the financial statements. So I believe Chanda put the link if you want to register. So you can go ahead and do so if you want to learn more. So thank you, and we will see you next month. Bye-bye.
Later.